Hey guys, I'm Dave and welcome to the Trull Gallery. Today we're going to rework my shop vac and dust deputy combination. This is kind of a design on the fly project made from some leftover 2x4s and some scrap plywood I had kicking around the shop. I don't plan on making it too pretty because, well, one, it's shop furniture, and two, I'll probably end up redesigning it in a year or two. But with that said, let's see how it all came together. If you've seen my videos on building a stand for my planer and the follow-up video that shows the updates to the dust collection, you'll remember that after a few tries it ended up looking like this. It works great, and after I started hooking up my shop vac to the dust deputy port, it worked even better. The challenge came when I attached my shop vac to the table saw. It removes most of the chips, but it all went straight into the bag. Those bags aren't cheap, and I was filling them up pretty quickly. There had to be a way to combine the two projects. I toyed with the idea of ordering a second dust deputy, but I realized I can use the one I have if I just configure things a little differently. Like most of my projects, this one started at the miter saw. I started by squaring up one end of each piece of the 2x4s I had kicking around. Then I set a stop and cut 3 pieces at 19 inches. I adjusted my stop and cut 2 more pieces, this time at 22 inches. At the table saw, I made sure I had my rip blade installed and set the fence so I could rip the stock in half. After each piece was ripped down, I readjusted the fence to just over 1.5 inches. The pieces were then flipped over, and then the other side was ripped down, removing those rounded edges. Swapping my table saw for the planer, I ran all the stock through, planing each side at least once until I was left with 1.5 inch square stock. Back at the table saw, I replaced my rip blade with my plywood blade and began to break down the sheets I had. I had a bit of a logic problem that often comes along from a job with no set plans. I cut an extra piece or two, but that's okay. I ended up with a bottom of 3/4 inch plywood at 22.5 by 22.5, although I would have preferred one side to be 23. Did I mention this was a build on the fly project? The sides and top are from 1/2 inch ply. The top is 22 inches square, the sides are 22.5 by 12, and the back is 22 by 12. With all the stock cut, I got out my vintage Craig pocket hole jig and set it up for 1.5 inch stock. Then I drilled a single pocket hole in one face of each end of the 19-inch pieces. For assembly, I used wood glue and 2.5 inch pocket hole screws. After adding glue to the joint, I squared things up and drove the screw home. This was repeated on the other 3 sides, before checking the diagonals to ensure that the unit was square. Then I assembled the other side assembly just like the first. The back pieces were put on much the same way. The 2 pieces were glued and screwed to one side piece, and then the second side was added. I grabbed a bar clamp here to help hold things together for the last 2 screws. Before adding the top and bottom panels, I laid out the locations for the fasteners. I started by setting my combination square to 3/4 inch and drew a line on 3 sides of the top, and then I reset the square to 1.25 inches and drew the lines on the bottom. Then, as a nod to my OCD, I laid out the screw locations so that they would be even on all sides, even the bottom, where they'll never be seen again. Just make sure that you avoid the pocket screws that are holding the frame together. The bottom was centered on the frame, with the front flush to the front legs. I then pre-drilled the holes with a taper bit and a countersink combination. The bottom was then fastened in place with some number 8 by 1.5" screws. This would normally be a good time to add the casters, but I was still waiting for them to arrive. The sides and back were assembled in the same way. Mark the center of the uprights, measure for screw locations, clamp it in place, drill, then screw it down. And if you're wondering about the sides and back, they're there to add some rigidity to the stand, but also allow for what I hope is plenty of airspace for the back to operate. I didn't use any glue on any of the plywood pieces. I just know that I'm going to rebuild this down the road. The last piece to go down was the top, and yes, it went down just like the others. What little designing I did do for this project was to measure the height of my shop vac and its width at its widest point. I'll need to pull the vac out of the stand from time to time to change the bags if they get filled. With the stand basically finished, it was time to pull off the casters from the vac and see how things fit. I put the caster screws back into the vac so they wouldn't get lost, in case I need them later. Again, I like things to be just so, and with that said, I put a flush trim bit in my router and cleaned up any bits of plywood that overhung its neighbor. Neatness counts. I know this is shop furniture, but I have to live with it. So I grabbed my random over sander with 150 grit paper and gave the whole stand the once over. I got rid of any pencil marks, rough edges, or any burrs left from the drilling process. I also eased any sharp edges with the sander. Under the category of redesigning, it's time to remove the bucket holder from the planer so that I can move it over to its new home. These planers have some weight to them, so I locked the casters and lowered it down slowly using my legs and not my back. Then I could unscrew the holder, set it aside, and set the planer back up on its casters. The mounting plate on the existing bucket holder was bigger than the top of the cart, so I ripped it down to 22 inches on the table saw. For now. With the plate ripped down, I mounted it to one side of the top and fastened it in place with some 1.25" screws. Again, for now. I say for now because this was about the time that I realized I'd made things so cozy I had no way to get to the power switch on top of the vac. The bucket holder was ripped down to 15 inches, and I laid out an area on the stand's top that I could cut out and give me access to the switch. I used my jigsaw to cut out the area that I'd just drawn out, and follow that by some quick sanding to smooth out the marks from the jigsaw. I figured this arch would be a good place to ease the edges, so I used my palm router and a 1/4 inch roundover bit. Another quick sanding and it was time to see how things looked. The bucket holder sat flush to one side and to the back and was screwed down, for keeps this time. I decided to add a little onboard storage to my stand. I marked a location for 3 holes and pre-drilled a 1/4 inch center hole in each location. The right front and left rear got a 3-inch hole, and the left front got a 2 1/8 inch hole. And these hole sizes are mostly determined by the hole saws that I have on hand. Each hole saw was started from the bottom and then finished from the top. This gave me clean holes with no blowout. Once again, I grabbed my palm router and rounded over the top of the new holes. One more sanding to remove the pencil marks and a little hand sanding to ease the bottom edges, and it was time to see how things fit. The hose wand goes in the back, the tapered nozzle in the small hole, and the working end of the hose goes in the right front. Now that my casters have finally arrived, let's put them on. I chose to go with 3-inch swivel casters with no locks. I don't move my vac often, and it's not a work surface, so these should work fine, he says hopefully. I used the same lines that I had left, from where I mounted the bottom to the frame, and set the casters so they would avoid any of the screws. On the front casters, I'm only using 2 lags to hold them in place. On the rear, I'm using 3, since I'm going up through the plywood and into the frame. If the casters start acting up, I'll come up with a solution to mount them with 4 fasteners, but again, this isn't going to move all that much. I'm using 1/4 inch by 2 inch long lag screws, so I pre-drilled my holes with a 3/16 inch bit. I used a bit of blue tape to mark the depth I needed and drilled all the holes. To speed things up a bit, I put a socket adapter on my driver, added a washer to each lag, and then ran them most of the way in. I stopped short of tight, as a driver like this can easily strip out the wood of the cart. I swapped out my driver for a ratchet, and then went back and tightened all the lags down. It's time to load up the cart for real. I started by running the power cord and the hose from the vac out the back of the cart. Then I slid the vac into the cart and loaded up the dust deputy. The hose from the vac was connected to the dust deputy, and the working end of the hose got tucked into its storage position. There's space at the bottom of the cart for the vac casters and the other accessories that I don't really use. They just got tossed back in there for now, and someday I might make it neater. Or not. And if you're wondering why things seem a little cramped in this shot, well, I have a few other projects going in the shop right now. I suppose I should add one little finishing touch, just in case this stand slides into another video at some point. Putting my dust deputy and shop vac together should greatly reduce the number of bags I go through. And the casters on the cart work so much better than any shop vac caster I've ever seen. If you'd like a set of plans to build a cart for your own shop, I'll have that linked below, along with a list of the materials I used. If your shop vac is a different size, these plans are easy enough to adapt. Just remember where your power switch is. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this project. Was there something I could have done differently, better, smarter, faster, easier? Drop them in the comments below. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up and maybe share it with your friends. And, if you haven't already, maybe hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you get notified each time I put out a new video. I'm not sure what's coming up next, but hopefully it'll be something interesting. So for now, stay safe, have a great day, and we'll see you soon.